Welcome to the F800Riders.org Service Companion DVD. My name is Rob Werksman. I'm the proprietor of F800Riders.org and F800Depot.com, and I will be your narrator for the duration of this DVD. In this video, we will be going over quite a few different things, starting with an end-to-end F800 servicing overview, which talks about A to Z what is all involved in servicing an F800 motorcycle, followed thereafter by a motorcycle disassembly video where we take bits and pieces off the motorcycle to get us where we want to be with the things that are following afterwards, such as the battery replacement, the air filter replacement, oil change, and the headlight bulb replacement. We will of course also be talking about the brake pad replacement on both the front and the rear wheel, and in doing so on the rear wheel we will also have to talk about the rear wheel removal from the motorcycle as well. From there, we will move on to the fork spring replacement, which in my opinion is one of the best upgrades you can do to the F800 motorcycle to improve its overall ride and feel. After the fork spring replacement, we will move on to installation of a few chosen accessories. First of all being an aftermarket exhaust. In this case, it's going to be a Leovance aluminum exhaust. Powerlet lead installation. For those who don't have the BMW charger and have a battery tender or SMA charger, a side stand enlarger, a rear hugger made by Skid Marks, LED tail and turn signal replacements, the peg lowering kit from MFW Wolf, and the use of the GS911. So, without any further ado, let's get into servicing. When we talk about servicing an F800, the first thing that we need to look at is the OEM recommended servicing schedule. In BMW's case, it's a series of 4 different services that run throughout the life of the motorcycle. The first one being a pre-delivery check, which happens even before you take ownership of the motorcycle, followed by a running-in check, also known as a 600-mile or 1,000-kilometer service, a minor service which starts at 6,000 miles or 10,000 kilometers and alternates with the major service which happens at 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers. Generally, after that major service, you're looking at another service, whether it be a minor and then a major and then a minor, every 6,000 miles or so. In regards to the new motorcycles which have the service indicator light, the motorcycle will let you know when it is due for service. So let's start talking about the pre-delivery check. This pre-delivery check, like I mentioned before, is completed by the BMW dealer prior to customer delivery. It consists of a few things. First and foremost is an uncrating, a damage check of the motorcycle, and motorcycle assembly. For instance, on the F800S and ST, the center panel actually is not bolted onto the bike when it arrives at the dealership. From there, they move on to charging of the battery, filling of the fuel tank, checking the tire pressure, and an engine suppression test, which basically ensures that while your side stand is down, you're not able to ride off. They will complete a road worthiness test where they'll hop on the motorcycle and zoom around for a bit, and they will clean it prior to the final point in the check, which is the explanation of some of the features and functionality of the motorcycle prior to you receiving it and riding off into the sunset. Now, prior to getting into the 600, 6,000, and 12,000 mile service overview, I want to let you know that there are checklists for each one of these services that are linked from and available for download in the F800Riders.org Hall of Wisdom. If you have a little bit of time, I would suggest you go and print out a version of each before you continue further in the DVD. The first real service that you're going to have to deal with on an F800 is the running-in check, which is also known as the 600-mile service or the 1,000-kilometer service. Generally, the big item on here is going to be an oil change and a filter replacement. Additionally, the dealer will also check a bunch of items on your motorcycle, such as the clutch play, the coolant level, the tire pressure and the tread depth on the tires, the lights and other signaling equipment, the engine suppression system, which is basically the side stand switch to make sure you can't ride off with the side stand down, and various torque values on bolts and fasteners all over the motorcycle. Additionally, the dealer should also do a test ride on your motorcycle and hook it up to the GT1, which is their computer system, to make sure there's no codes on the motorcycle's computer system. Finally, they will do a confirmation in your owner's booklet that should give some sort of little sign off to notify you that the servicing is done. The next service you're going to have to worry about after your 600-mile running in check is a minor service. This service starts at 6,000 miles or 10,000 kilometers and continues every 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers afterward. It alternates with the major service, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Generally, this service is very similar to what you'll see in the 600-mile running in check, the major item being an oil change and a filter replacement. There are a few additional items that you're going to see the dealer needs to complete in order for this service to be finished. One is going to be the brake pads and discs get checked, and the tooth belt or chain gets checked here as well. Now, the big item with servicing on every F800 is going to be this major service. Major services start at 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers and repeats every 12,000 miles or 20,000 kilometers afterward. This alternates with the minor service. So for instance, the minor service will happen at 6,000 and then at 18,000 miles. The major service will happen at 12,000 and again at 24,000 miles going forward. The big item on here isn't necessarily the oil change and filter replacement like it is on the minor. This one also adds in an air filter change as well. The big item here is going to be this valve clearance check. It takes up quite a bit of time. It uses a few special parts which are only available via BMW dealers, and honestly it's so complex that we're not even going to get into it on this video. In addition to the valve clearance check, there's also quite a few torque values that need to be checked by the dealer as well. But wait, that's not all. Every other major service, there are two items that need to happen too. A spark plug replacement every 24,000 miles or 40,000 kilometers, and a tooth belt and potentially damper replacement depending on the wear every 24,000 miles or 40,000 kilometers as well. Additionally, there is a brake fluid flush that needs to happen after your first year of ownership and every other year afterward. It generally corresponds with major services. The last part of the major services is a test ride, hooking up to the GT1 again to scan for any error codes that are on the motorcycle and writing the confirmation. So, recapping a little bit. Pre-delivery check even before you pick up an F800. A minor running in check at 600 miles. A minor service at 6,000. A major at 12,000. Another minor at 18,000. A major at 24,000, and on from there. Now, one of the items that I do want to touch upon quickly is this service due indicator. Prior to the implementation of this indicator, they were definitely hard values as to when you wanted to bring your motorcycle in. The idea behind this service due indicator is that the dealer, each time you bring it in for service, is to reset that value. So basically what you're going to see is you're going to be bringing it in every 6,000 miles. Now, what you see in front of you now are items the American Motorcyclist Association recommends that you check each time you go out for a motorcycle ride. Generally, they only take about 2 minutes to check. However, those 2 minutes might be the most valuable 2 minutes of your day. First and foremost is where the rubber hits the road. Check your wheels to make sure there is no damage to them, and check your tires to ensure that they are properly inflated. Next come the controls and the cables. Give the clutch and the front brake a little bit of a tug to make sure they feel correct, and make sure the cables coming out of them aren't wearing or aren't binding. From there, move on to the lights and the horn. Make sure your headlight, tail light, and side indicator markers are working, and make sure the horn actually works as well. Move on to oil and fuel. Fuel self-explanatory. Oil you do want to check occasionally to make sure that you aren't burning any. Next up is the chassis. Hop on the bike, rock it around a little bit. Make sure that everything moves smoothly and slowly. After that is the side stand and center stand. Make sure that they are both down or up and make sure that they are going to stay there. With your pre-ride check now done, you're free to go out and have a fantastic ride, and we are now free to stop talking about servicing and move on to our next topic, which is motorcycle disassembly and the associated video. Let's start by removing the seat. The next item on the list is the removal of the side panels. On the F800S, which is what we're looking at here, there are 5 bolts. Four of the bolts are along the top of the panel. The 5th bolt, as you'll see here in a second, is on the bottom rear of the panel. You have to remove all 5 bolts in order to get the panel off. After you remove all 5 bolts, there is also this nagging problem of the front turn indicator, which you'll have to remedy in order to completely remove the panel. To remove the front indicator from the panel, simply unbolt it from the back. Take the front cover off. The inner portion of the indicator also comes out here, as you'll see. And there are 2 tabs on the back that just pop right off and slide through the connector to detach the panel from the rest of the motorcycle. Next is the removal of the center panel. The center panel was taken off via removing 8 bolts from it, each of which are T25 Torx, and upon reinstallation are torqued down to a pressure of 5 Newton meters. The next item that we have to uninstall are going to be the rear view mirrors. This can be either a Torx or an Allen if you have the Evolution mirror extenders installed, and they are torqued to 6 Newton meters upon reinstallation. The next item that we have to uninstall is the windshield. The windshield uses slightly larger bolts. They are T30s as opposed to T25s, and there is a small plastic washer underneath each. When reinstalling them, they are torqued to 6 Newton meters. The next portion that we have to take off are the upper side panels. What you're going to find here is there are only 2 bolts per side panel. They are both T25 and they will be torqued to 5 Newton meters upon reinstallation. The next item that we're going to remove is the rear side panel. It is a T25. It is torqued to 5 Newton meters upon reinstallation. And what you'll see as we remove the panel is there's really not a whole lot under it. And especially when you start talking about the other side, we're not even going to remove it simply because the only thing that's under it is the gas tank, and we are not going to be mucking around with the gas tank at all in this video. That completes motorcycle disassembly. Our next stop, now that we have access, is battery replacement. Removing the battery is actually very easy. What you'll need is a Phillips head screwdriver, a larger one than what we've been using in the past, and you're going to disconnect both the negative and the positive battery terminals. And there is also a cover that you will need to unscrew as well and move away. Once you remove the cover, lifting the battery out is very easy. Just grab it and pull it on out. Reinstallation of the battery is just as easy. Just place the battery in, terminals facing forward, and reconnect both the negative and the positive battery terminal after reconnecting the cover that's on top of the battery. One thing I do want to bring your attention to quickly as we're reinstalling the battery is an item that's kind of hanging off of the positive battery terminal. You can sort of see it here toward the bottom of the frame. That is actually the GPS connector. There's a special GPS plug on all of the newer BMW motorcycles, and on the F800S, this is where that particular plug is located. Now there is no official torque specification that I was able to find, just crank it down till it's nice and tight. Air filter replacement is next. First you need to remove the two retaining clips that hold the air filter and the snorkel in place. Remove the snorkel, it should have the air filter right in the end, and remove the air filter from the snorkel. Replacement of the air filter is just as easy. Take the new one out of the box and then put it into the end of the snorkel and replace the entire contraption onto the motorcycle the same way you took it apart. Generally it's very easy. The only thing you have to really look out for is to ensure that they are flush up against each other and you don't have any type of air leak. Just because you're pulling a stock BMW paper filter out of the motorcycle doesn't necessarily mean you have to replace it with the same item. In this case, we are actually replacing the air filter on this motorcycle with a K&N air filter. Benefits of this type of air filter are that it is washable and reusable. There are potentially some performance gains from using it, and that it has an OEM type fit. Next up, oil change. With changing the oil, the first thing that you want to do is break the seal on the drain plug, pull it out, and let the oil start draining into a pan that you've already placed under the motorcycle. The plug on the F800 is actually 24 millimeter. It's a socket. And one of the very important things you have to remember when removing the drain plug is there is actually a crush washer that's on the inside. As you can see here, it's not on there anymore. We removed it right as we took the drain plug out of the motorcycle, but it's very important that you take that crush washer off. It's either on the plug that came off of the motorcycle or it's still on the casing for the engine. We're also going to have to remove the oil filter from the motorcycle as well. There is a special part which you'll need that will fit right on top of the oil filter and attach to a wrench so you can break the the oil filter from the motorcycle. It's very important here that you don't push the motorcycle over as well, because those oil filters can be on the motorcycle very, very tightly. Once you've broken the seal, it should just spin right out of place, and you'll also get some oil that will seep out of there as well. Don't forget to dispose of the oil in an environmentally friendly way. From here, we're going to clean the drain plug to make sure that it is free of all oil and all residue that might have gotten on it during normal motorcycle operation. We're now going to select our oil filter. There are two different ones. Here is the black one for the GS models, and there is also a silver one that is offered by BMW, the one we're going to be using for the S and the ST. We're also going to be sure that we use a brand new crush washer for the drain plug. Next up, we're going to reinstall the oil filter. Take a little bit of the excess oil and smear it on the front of the oil filter, and clean where we're going to reinstall the oil filter into. Place it back up in there and screw it on in, and then torque to specification. We're also going to reinstall the drain plug as well. Clean the area where the drain plug is going back up into, and place the drain plug with the new crush washer back into the receptacle, hand tighten, and then crank down to 40 Newton meters to finish the job. Next, we're going to refill the motorcycle with oil. Remove the dipstick from the engine, clean the dipstick off. Proceed to refill the motorcycle with 3 liters of 10W40 engine oil. Finally, check the engine oil by removing the dipstick and making sure that the oil level is between the indicated markers. Once that is complete, replace the dipstick, and your job in regards to changing the oil engine of an F800 is now complete. Although it is not required, we are removing the front fairing so we can shoot replacing the headlight bulbs more easily for the DVD. Remove the plastic cover on both the high and low beams. Detach the plug from the headlight bulb. Remove the retaining clip by pinching the two ends together and swinging upward or to the right. The headlight bulb just pops right out. Reinstallation is the exact opposite of deinstallation. Replace the bulb, anchor in with the retaining clip, connect the wire, and replace the plastic cover on top. Please note that the bulbs are actually notched, so there is not an improper way to reinstall them.
Plug it back in.
What size bulbs are those?
They are H7s. Yeah, this shot's gonna be useless. Now these little things just snap back, crackle. How the hell did it go?
Gotta make sure you don't put your hat in there.
I'm trying to look for the...
Next up is brake pad replacement and the rear wheel removal. With the front brake pads, the first thing that we want to do, although BMW does not recommend it, is remove the front caliper. Makes it a lot easier to get to the pads overall. This is done by removing the two front caliper bolts. They are T45s and they take 30 Newton meters upon reinstallation. Once that is done, the caliper just pulls right away from the front disc. Once we have the caliper away, the next thing we're going to do is remove the two front retaining clips. There's one, and there is also another one on the other side of the caliper. After we remove the two front clips, we're going to remove the two retaining pins. After the pins, we are going to take the spring out. And then from there, both of the pads should just fall right out. Reinstallation is very simple as well. Insert the two new pads. We're using the older ones here. Reinsert the spring. Put the two retaining pins in. Make sure that the pins go through the holes in the pads and into the other side of the caliper. After the pins are in, we're going to put the retaining clip back through the pin. There's actually a little hole in the pin itself. You may need to rotate, like we're showing here, the pin so that you can actually see the hole to insert the clip into. We're going to spread the pads a little bit to ensure that it fits over the disc, and then we are going to bolt back onto the front fork leg. Repeat for the other side. Keep in mind you do not need to disconnect the ABS sensor. Next up is the removal of the rear wheel to get to the rear caliper and brake pad. There are 5 bolts on the rear wheel. They are T50 Torx. You want to have the motorcycle in gear while removing this. And additionally, prior to even starting, you're going to need a rear stand to make sure that the wheel is off of the ground. In this particular demonstration, we are using a pit bull rear stand with a reversible mount so it fits right into the F800. When you are removing the last bolt, make sure to have a firm grip on the wheel, otherwise it will just fall right off. Once we have the rear wheel off, we are going to take the motorcycle out of gear and rotate the disc so we have access to the 2 bolts that are holding the rear caliper on the swing arm. The 2 bolts are removed via a T45 Torx. Now once we get the 2 bolts out of there, we're not just going to take the caliper out. We have to do it in a very specific way because on the ABS equipped F800s it has to be lifted out in a way that we don't break off the ABS sensor tab. Just lift it up, slide it to the right, and out it comes. Disassembly of this caliper and brake pads is somewhat similar to what we had in the front. we're going to remove the single clip. We're going to spread the pads apart, and then you'll see here we're going to have to tap out the pin. There is a BMW special part for this, but what we're going to be using is a small Phillips head screwdriver and just something to smack it with. And you can see once you get it started, it's pretty easy just to pull out the other side. Once you remove this pin, the pads just fall right out. They are not the same pads as what you would use on the front. Reinstallation is the exact opposite of deinstallation on this caliper and with these pads. Place both pads in. There is only a single way that they will both fit back in there. And then we are going to put the pin through. You need to make sure when you're putting the pin that it fits through both holes on the caliper and the holes in the pads themselves so they stick up in there. Once that's done, we're going to go ahead and smack it back up in there with something just so that it fits right back up in there. And we're going to tap it in as well. Again, there is a BMW special part for this. We are not going to be using it.
What you want to see?
You'll see what we're really looking for here is the hole in the pin so we can put the retaining clip back in.
Angle it up toward the camera.
There is a very specific location where this hole needs to be. It needs to be facing up toward the top of the motorcycle when reinstalled, and the clip just snaps right in there, and as you can see it should look like so. Spread the pads a little bit, and then it should fit right back on top of the disc.
ABS sensor drops in, pads go over, and bolt her back up.
Again, when putting the caliper on the disc, we need to make sure that we pay special attention to the ABS sensor. And when it bolts back onto the swing arm, it's going to be via a T45 bolt, and it is going to be torqued down to 22 Newton meters.
Oh, is that annoying?
And torque to specification.
Yes, sir.
Okay, hang on.
Once we have the rear caliper installed, we're going to reinstall the rear wheel. 5 bolts, T50, torqued down to 60 Newton meters. Now, one thing you might notice by looking at the left of the frame is that the exhaust is missing. That is going to be something that we cover a little bit later in the DVD, and it might be something that you review prior to starting the rear wheel removal and the rear brake pad replacement. The first item with replacing your fork springs is going to seem a little bit familiar. It's the front caliper removal. Now we're going to look at one side here. You're going to have to do it for both sides. but the first step in the process is to remove the bolts holding the caliper on the front fork. Both bolts, or all four bolts when you take into consideration there are two calipers, are T45 and are retorqued to 30 Newton meters upon reinstallation. Now we're only going to show one side, and you're going to have to repeat it for the other side, but generally it's the same exact process, just slightly mirrored when you look at the other end. The next step is to loosen these two bolts. There are four bolts total when you consider there are two forks. The next step is actually the removal of the front axle. We're going to be using a 22 millimeter Allen for this. It's actually a BMW special part, however you can find it, hopefully, available in your area. We are loosening only, we are not actually removing it at this time. Once we loosen the axle, you should then be able to unscrew it with your hand. One of the things that might help while doing so is if you maintain an upward pressure on the front wheel, just so it spins out of there nicely. One thing that should be pretty apparent by now is that to actually do this, you're going to need to raise the front end of the motorcycle off of the ground. If you look to the right of the frame, it's pretty evident how we're doing this. A standard floor jack, a piece of wood, and then we're jacking up the entire motorcycle on the engine and kind of weighting it down at the back. There's a couple different options to how you can do this. You can either strap the front of the motorcycle to an I-beam in the roof and then raise it up. Really, how you do this is up to your own discretion. Once you get the wheel free, there will be a spacer that sometimes stays on the wheel, sometimes is attached to the fork, but you'll need to get the motorcycle up far enough that you're able to slide the wheel out from under the front fender. Do not detach the fender. That's what's holding the two forks together. Once we have the front wheel removed, the next thing we're going to tackle are going to be these two bolts on the bottom of each fork. These are the bolts that actually hold the fork up on the top portion of it and maintain the fluid inside. Both bolts are 6 millimeter Allen bolts, which is odd considering almost the entire motorcycle is torques, and they are torqued to 20 Newton meters upon reinstall. Once the bolt is removed, a lot of the fork oil will start coming through the bottom of the fork itself. Sometimes, as we'll see here in a moment, these are a little bit difficult to get removed. It generally does take a bit for all the fork oil to make it out of the fork. Once the fork is done draining, we're going to take the bolt out, clean it up a bit, ensure that the washer is still on it. And then we're going to reinstall it back up into the fork, because the next item on our list is going to be adding the spring and the oil back to it, and if we don't put this bolt back in, it's going to all come right back out the bottom. What we've done so far in this video is to basically say, repeat for the other side. Well, in this particular situation, I thought it would be valuable to actually put this in here, and you'll see why here in a moment. Occasionally these bolts don't quite come out real easily. So what we had to do in this particular case is, well, we broke out the power screwdriver and put a 6mm Allen attachment into it. What we're going to do here is kind of pull down on the front fork a little bit just to seat that bolt, and we'll be able to break it loose here in a second. And voila, there we go. Now that it's done draining, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the bolt. And what you're going to see on this fork, because we had to tug it around a little bit, we're going to have to push it back up so the bolt grabs and it's able to screw down into place. This is also your last chance to do a little bit of cleanup down here, because the next item on our list is the reinstallation of the front wheel. You're going to see we have the spacer in place. Just wheel it back up in there, and we're going to go ahead and put the front axle in next. When replacing the front axle, you'll notice that you have to pick the front wheel up, obviously, because the bike is still up in the air. But when you insert it, the threads on the front axle should grab on the other fork. What we're aiming at here is just to get the front axle started, because what we're going to do afterward is actually break out the torque wrench with that big 22mm Allen and torque it down to specification. After torquing down the front axle, we're also going to torque these two bolts on the bottom of each fork down as well. Next up is the reinstallation of the calipers. Slide the caliper over the disc, put the two bolts back in, and they are torqued down to 30 Newton meters. And finally, don't forget to repeat for the other side. After all, there are two front calipers on the F800S, ST, and GS. Next, we're ready to move up top. What you see here is the LSL handlebar kit for the F800S. There are 6mm Allens, 4 of them, that are on this kit. However, if you have the standard handlebars for the F800S, you don't need to do anything. You have straightaway access to the top of the forks. Now on the F800 ST, you're going to have to do something very similar to what you see here. The reason being is we need free and clear access to the top of both forks because we're going to pull the spring right out of the top. Now that we have free and clear access, we're going to remove the plastic cover. We are going to press down on the retainer, and we are going to take out the clip that holds it into place. Now what you see here, it looks very, very easy to do. In actuality, it was not. It took us quite a few takes to get this done, and it was probably one of the more difficult things we had to do all day. The item that really is going to help you here is a very thin flathead screwdriver or potentially a pick. Now we're going to take whatever is in there out. First was the retainer, then it was the spacer that you see here. There is also, next will be a washer, and finally we're going to be looking at the spring itself. As you can see, when you're removing the spring, you're going to need to have something to get real far down in there in order to pull it out. Next up is to repeat it for the other side. But what you'll see here is we already took the clip right out, but we were unable to get the retainer out. What actually is happening is the retainer is stuck to the top of the spacer. You'll see here in a second how we actually got it out. And no, it was not by doing this. We actually got a high power magnet, popped it right onto the top, and pulled it right on out. And you can see here that it was definitely stuck to the spacer. We then removed the spacer, the washer, and finally the spring from the right fork. Once the old spring is gone, we can replace it with the new one. In this case, we're using a HyperPro replacement. It is a progressive spring. It is installed with the progressive side up. Notice how it's tightly wound at the top. After the new spring goes in, we're going to put the washer back into place. And then we're going to put the spacer in afterward. Notice how we're not closing the fork up yet. That's because we have to fill it with new fluid. We're using the fluid that actually came with the HyperPro kit. We're going to be using about 500 milliliters of it. The HyperPro kit, if you're interested, actually comes with a full liter of fluid, enough for 2 forks. After the fluid's in, we can go ahead and close it up. Put the stopper back in, push down and put the circlip into place to hold everything in there. Once that clip is in place, the only thing that remains is actually putting that plastic top back in and then repeating for the other side. The next step in the process, actually the final step for replacing the springs, is to reinstall the handlebars. What you see here again is the LSL kit, but for the F800 ST, they go together exactly the same way as you took them apart. You want to crank them down to 20 Newton meters of torque. Next up is the installation of an aftermarket exhaust. Seen here, we have the connector pipe, the hanger, the spring tool for installation of the spring, the new bolt, instructions, the sticker, and the actual silencer itself and the item that goes on the silencer. But if you take a look inside the silencer, you're also going to notice an extra part. It's called the DB killer. We're going to start by removing the stock exhaust. We have a T45 Torx and a 13mm socket. We're just going to loosen the existing hanger. Next, we're going to loosen the connector pipe. Once we get the connector pipe sufficiently loosened, we're going to take the bolt out of the hanger and then remove the silencer from the motorcycle. After we get the old silencer out of the way, we're going to put the new connecting pipe in place. Slide it into the bracket and tighten the bracket down enough just so it doesn't wobble around and stays in place. These connector pipes seem to be pretty much universal, with both Leo Vince and Remus using them. With the connector pipe in place, let's turn our attention to the silencer. We're going to put the hanger according to the included directions, and then slide the silencer onto the connecting pipe until it bottoms out. We're going to put the bolt into the hanger position and then attach it to the motorcycle. Attaching the new silencer to the motorcycle is going to take a little bit of trial and error to get everything lined up correctly. It's going to be important to take a look at the included directions that come with the pipe to understand the exact order in which items bolt up onto the hanger. Once we have the silencer in place, we're going to start tightening everything down. There is a rubber bushing on this particular mount and there is no torque specification, so you're going to have to tighten it down to your own discretion. The connecting pipe is tightened down to 35 Newton meters of torque. We're now going to put the retaining spring on. One end attaches to the silencer, the other one attaches to the connecting pipe. Leo Vince is nice because they actually include a tool to help you stretch the spring out and attach it to both. Finally, check the silencer to ensure it does not wobble around too much. Optionally, we're going to be installing the DB killer. It is a pipe within a pipe that tones down the overall volume of the silencer. The DB killer with the Leo Vince pipe that we see here is included and installs by slipping it into the end of the silencer and tightening it down with the included screw. Depending on where you live in the world, DB killers might be mandated by law. And what would an aftermarket exhaust be without an aftermarket exhaust sticker? Vince, it's included with the package and it just basically sticks right on. Now side stand enlarger install. Three stainless steel bolts, 3 stainless steel washers, and a laser etched side stand extender plate. The reason why I wanted to show you this is because although the plate that will attach to the bottom of the side stand has very close tolerances, the side stand itself does not. I was really hoping to go through this and see a side stand that did not fit into the plate, and we would have to get into some filing down. However, what you can see here is our side stand fit into the extender very nicely, and as you'll see in a second, the bolts with a little Loctite held it on there very nicely. The first steps to installing a skid marks rear hugger on an F800S or ST is the removal of the top and bottom belt guard. This is done by removing 3 T25 bolts from the swing arm. The top portion of the hugger guard is very easy to remove. There's an exposed T25 bolt and it just basically unclips from the swing arm. The bottom portion is another matter entirely. 2 T25 bolts are actually located right underneath the belt. In the instructions for the skid marks hugger, they want you to remove the belt to access these 2 bolts. For our installation, we're actually sliding the belt to the side and we're able to access them direct. Once we get the bottom belt guard out, it looks like such. We're actually going to be placing a new bracket for the hugger in its place. Voila! The bracket mounts to the swing arm in the same two locations where the bolts mounted underneath of the belt. It uses two enclosed new bolts, Allen as opposed to Torx, that come with the skid marks kit. When mounting the new hugger bracket, one must be very certain that it clears the back of the rear shock. If for some reason the bracket does not clear the rear shock, one must bend it slightly to make it fit. In our case, we did not have to bend the bracket at all. These two bolts that are located underneath the belt can be torqued to specification that comes with the skid marks kit. We will not need to get access to them any further. The next step in installing a skid marks hugger is to mount the additional bracket that comes with the kit. This mounts toward the rear of the swing arm, right behind where the right rear footrest would be. This bracket we do not want to tighten down all of the way. The next step in the process is to slide the hugger into place and to gently bolt it to the auxiliary bracket that is near the rear foot peg. The next step in the process is to attach the hugger to the mount using the two bolts and washers that are included with the kit. These need to be left loose for the time being, as we need to ensure the hugger clears the rear shock and clears the wheel. Once we know that the hugger clears everything, we can go back and tighten everything to specification and take the motorcycle out for a shakedown cruise. Installation of a new LED taillight on an F800S and ST is quite easy. First thing we need to do is actually remove the lens. This is attached via two small Phillips head screws. Once the lens is removed, the bulb just twists out, and the bulb portion of the LED taillight just twists right back in its place. The light portion of the LED taillight attaches to the bulb portion via a small Phillips head included screw. Just unscrew it from the bulb portion and attach the light as shown. Next, we are going to test the brake light. Turn on the motorcycle, hit the brakes, see if everything lights up. Notice there are only two strips lit up on this one. That's because this is the two-stripe model. There is an additional full light-up model that's available. After the testing is complete, we're going to screw the lens back into place and call it a day. Installation of side marker LEDs is just as easy as the taillight. Remove the lens cover with a small Phillips head screwdriver, and the existing incandescent portion of it pops right out, disconnected from the two tabs. The LED turn signal assembly plugs in its place. As long as you attach the wires to the outside tabs of the assembly, you're good to go. It doesn't matter which cable attaches where. Because we have the optional red and amber turn signals for the rear of the motorcycle, we have an additional cable for the inner portion of the LED. Consult the F800riders.org Hall of Wisdom as to exactly what cable this gets tied into. The cable itself gets threaded back through the same way as the existing two cables are. We're going to go ahead and button up the turn signals next, and we're going to test it shortly thereafter. This is our test to see if it worked. Note the fast blinking because we do not have the front turn signal installed. and the red of the turn signal lighting up with the brake, because that's how we have it wired in. When removing the pegs, the first thing you need to do is remove the circlip from the bottom of them and push the retaining pin up and watch out for the spring. In this case, we're replacing one of the foot pegs with the MV Motorrad set. Notice how the spacer between the peg and the mounting bracket is in place on the right side. The MFW Wolf setup, which we see here, is slightly different. First up is the mount, which actually installs in place of where the traditional foot peg would be. It slides in, spring goes in front of it, and the retaining pin goes right through it with a circlip on the bottom. Note the tool that we're using to compress the spring. Next up is the extension. This is a 30mm extension. Also note that we're using blue thread locker here to keep it in place. After the extension, we finally come to the peg. This is a silver race peg. They also make a master grip peg as well. And they're both available in multiple different colors. This is installed onto the extension, and again we're going to be using some blue thread locker on it to keep it in place. We're also going to be installing a shifter extension as well. Slip it over the existing shifter, put a towel over it, and crimp it down into place. It will stay put. And finally, GS911 use. The GS911 device hooks up to the F800S or F800GS via the diagnostic port. It plugs in and attaches on, and shortly after attaching you should see a green light light up to signify the GS911 is ready to go. Depending on model, you can either attach via USB or Bluetooth, and you can do quite a bit of stuff with the software. Now, they make a Windows and a BlackBerry version, which attaches to all F800 models, in which you can query the status of the ABS to see exactly what ABS unit you have. You can also diagnose fault codes as well, and you can get real-time running values of your motorcycle. We'll be going much more in-depth with the GS911 in the next release of this Service Companion DVD, and when the GS911 folks release their version that will reset the service indicator light. And that concludes the F800Riders.org Service Companion DVD. I hope you have enjoyed watching it as much as I have enjoyed making it. Finally, before we go, I would just like to plug again the F800Riders.org Hall of Wisdom. Hopefully this DVD has inspired you to go out and service your own motorcycle. In doing so, we ask that you post the walkthroughs of the servicing that you do to the Hall of Wisdom so that others may benefit from your experience. I'm Rob Werksman, and I wish you many years of safe riding.